People in the little English town of Alton knew and liked Gregory Baker very well. As a boy, he contracted polio, and later in life, he was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, leaving him physically disabled and mainly confined to his home. Although Greg's health prevented him from participating in many activities, he still made an effort to be part of his church and the community. With the help of local agency caregivers, he was able to live comfortably in the home he had inherited from his mother, and on the modest money he earned tutoring math to local youngsters. But then, in 2005, Greg met Thelma Yvonne Purchase. She was a 42-year-old mother of 3 who would become his new caregiver and maybe a little bit more. Thelma and her partner Kelvin Amos lived in the Stoke-on-Trent area, approximately 10 miles away. Both Kelvin and Thelma were single parents when they met through their children's school. She moved in after they started dating to save him money on maintaining 2 homes. During that initial blissful phase, Kelvin felt Thelma and Greg were just 2 good friends while maintaining her professionalism. Greg helped take care of Thelma's son. His name was Lance. She was tutoring him. And Kelvin was understanding of her caregiving role, despite her excessive visits to Greg's home. The caregiver and her client's improper behavior started drawing other agency employees' attention. There was a lot of confusion about the nature of their relationship. Thelma, she said that her and Greg had a father-daughter connection, while other accounts painted a completely different picture. The 2 caregivers remembered seeing Thelma sit on Greg's lap, cuddling him and giving him passionate kisses more than once, and it was strongly implied that their affection went beyond that of a father and daughter. You see, Greg's close friend Andrea Stafford was among many befuddled by their odd friendship. She said, "I couldn't understand why Greg was getting involved with her because she wasn't his type at all. Cheeky minx. I know opposites attract, but they wouldn't have anything in common to talk about because he was such an intellectual." In other words, Thelma was thick as pig shit. Stafford went on to say, "I realized as it went along that it was a little bit more that Greg felt than just getting to know his carer really well. It was affecting his emotions, and he was getting tied up in it." Greg was clearly beginning to develop feelings for Thelma, and she, in turn, was enjoying the money and gifts he would shower her with. When she was having trouble going to work, Thelma knew just which buttons to push and how to get Greg to help. He handed her £1,500 to help her purchase a car. Andrea immediately saw that Thelma was taking advantage of Greg. Still, she also realized that such a warning would not deter Greg's growing obsession with his caretaker. Thelma's caregiver's paycheck wasn't enough to support her, so she started looking for a higher paying job. Yet she didn't want to give up Greg's cash gifts, so she kept coming to see him as a friend or lover rather than a caretaker. Thelma and Kelvin's relationship had already begun to deteriorate by 2006. While Thelma continued to spend a great deal of her time away from work with Greg, her son Lance was becoming involved in criminal activities. He was expelled from school after being discovered using cannabis on school grounds. His behavior deteriorated from there, which caused tension between Kelvin and Thelma. Thelma's behavior toward Kelvin at that moment made it seem like she just wanted to get rid of him. Thelma was highly self-centered, and her inability to get the luxury she wanted started to drive her crazy. Even though she did not want to be with Kelvin, she also did not want to risk losing her house by ending their relationship. If she kept up with the charade of caring about Greg, she could ultimately get something in return. But it was impossible to predict how long Greg would live, and thus how long she must wait for the money. Thelma needed to make certain choices in light of these circumstances. She approached a local criminal and asked if they would be willing to take Kelvin's life so she could keep the house. Wow, how sinister. When they refused to carry out the hit, Thelma implemented Plan B. Plan B was to phone the police and accuse Kelvin of domestic assault. Of course, the police had to investigate, and Kelvin, who had been arrested many times before, was having a difficult time. But her accusations caused the end of their relationship, and Kelvin remained in his property with his children. Thelma herself moved to a neighbouring council house. She earned £8,500 in back pay from her employer and spent it all renovating her property into a display home. But she kept on seeing Greg until 2007, when he told her what she had wanted to hear all along. Greg updated his will to include Thelma and his best friend Andrea as beneficiaries. That meant that upon his passing, they would each receive a portion of the £75,000 he had tied up in the cottage, with Thelma expected to receive the lion's share of the will, approximately £60,000. This information surprised Andrea, who claimed that Greg had told them about the will on one of the infrequent occasions when they were both present at his house. She felt he had not known Thelma long enough for her to get a large portion of his inheritance. When Thelma learned of the new will, she decided she couldn't wait until the end of Greg's natural life to get her hands on his money. She needed him to die sooner. Thelma, although cold-blooded, realized she couldn't murder him. That's when she asked for help from her 19-year-old son, Lance. He then spoke to his pals and inquired whether they would be willing to kill for £8,000. Shane Edge, a friend of Lance's, also aged 19, agreed immediately. And so it was over a barbecue with the family that Thelma and the two young men planned to murder Greg Baker. Greg, who could only go around with the help of his caregivers, had a strict daily schedule that was well known to Thelma. He had his caretaker take £500 out of his bank account, which is something he did every Friday. He would put the money in the top pocket of his pajamas and go to sleep, then use the money to pay his caregivers and purchase whatever groceries or sundries he requires for the week. Every night, at the same time, Greg would be assisted into bed by his carers, and rather than give each of them a set of keys to his house that might easily go missing, he simply leaves the door unlocked at night so that his caregivers and neighbors could easily access his home in case of an emergency. This made it easy for the trio to plan the murder. On Thelma's 44th birthday, on June the 5th, 2007, Greg had one of his caregivers go out with some cash and buy her an extravagant bottle of perfume. He had no idea that she was planning to kill him that very night. Thelma parked her car a few streets from Greg's cottage and watched the young men stroll to Greg's house. Both men entered the house through the unlocked entrance and headed up the stairs to where Greg was sleeping. Shane took the pillow from under his head and held it over his face, while he sat on his chest to force air out of his lungs. "Why are you trying to murder me?" was Greg's last question before he died. "Suffocation is a horrible way to die," said Dr. Sarah Jarvis, a medical journalist. She said, "Your adrenaline flows through you, your oxygen drops very quickly, and the carbon monoxide rises. Even if it weren't awake, you would be as soon as you realize you couldn't breathe," she said, likening the experience to drowning. Then, Shane took £500 out of Greg's pajama pockets once he was certain Greg was dead, and then he walked out with the pillow. Thelma drove them back to her house, where she burned Shane's sneakers, shirt, and the pillow he'd used to suffocate Greg in her backyard. Greg's care worker arrived at the regular time the following day to help him get out of bed and make breakfast. Greg seemed to be soundly sleeping when he entered the room through the unlocked door. But after the caregiver failed to wake him, he concluded that his client had died during the night and called an ambulance. As the care agency notified their personnel of the tragic news, and word spread across the small community, there was a general sense of grief, but there was nothing odd about the death of a seriously disabled man. At first, it was thought that Greg had died of natural causes, but when the police were called, it was quickly determined that he had been suffocated. As the medical examiner determined Greg's cause of death, police began looking into his murder. The most obvious explanation for the incident was a burglary. However, this was quickly disproved because the TV stereo and other valuable objects were undisturbed, even if £500 was stolen from the pajamas. The investigation team considered who may have anything to gain from Greg's demise. In light of the updated will, the police had two prime suspects, Greg's friends, Andrea and Thelma. Andrea later said, "I remember when the police knocked on my door and asked me about the murder. It was quite traumatic for me because I knew that Greg had told me some time ago about his will, and I knew I was a beneficiary. I didn't know what implications that would have, and obviously that's why I had to be questioned to be eliminated from the inquiries." Soon thereafter, Thelma became the main suspect. She said she was at home the night Greg was murdered and thus innocent of involvement. According to Thelma, her car, which Greg had purchased for her, had been parked in the driveway all night. It was hardly a complicated or well-planned murder, as the police could quickly provide CCTV footage of her car at various points of its route to Alton. Two stickers on the back window made it easy to spot. In addition, Thelma's phone location could be verified using mobile data, as it would follow the same path as the car. After seeing this proof, Thelma recanted her original story. This time, she said her son Lance and his buddy Shane had borrowed her car to visit a local drug dealer. She said she left her phone in the car and she didn't notice it until the next morning, when she discovered it on her doorstep. She claimed that the two men had posted it through the letterbox after returning the car early in the morning. The authorities, however, were not convinced despite her claims of innocence, not least because she stood to gain the most from the crime and the investigation was still ongoing. Finally, a cop observed a little burn mark on a paving stone in Thelma's garden and used that as a lead to get a break in the case. He lifted the slab and found charred fabric that may have formerly been a piece of a sneaker, and a fragment of material that may have been a feather but was otherwise unrecognizable. A London Natural History Museum specialist verified this was a feather. Not just any old feather, but the sort used in high-end bedding. By identifying the feather's origin, they determined which of the area's feather pillow suppliers produced the missing pillow associated with Greg's death. Video surveillance footage also showed Lance and Shane visiting a gas station very early in the morning, spending a lot of money on booze while Shane seemed barefoot. The police were getting closer to solving the case when a well-known local felon gave them a vital piece of information. The informant verified that she had seen Thelma, Lance and Shane together on the night in question, corroborating what they had feared, that Thelma had not acted alone. The informant also revealed that Thelma had asked her to assassinate her ex-partner Kelvin for money. After reviewing the evidence, the court decided to file murder charges against Thelma Purchase and against 20-year-old Lance Rudge and 21-year-old Shane Edge for the death of Greg Baker. During the trial, Thelma said she was innocent and put the blame on the murder on her son Lance, who refused to testify, and on Shane, who said he had nothing to do with it. "Thelma, you classless cow." Nevertheless, Thelma, Shane and Lance were all found guilty of murder and handed life sentences with minimum periods of 20, 30 and 18 years, respectively. Kelvin, the ex, he said, "I met her through the children when she moved in close by. A relationship started. And regarding the murder, he said, I just thought she was Greg's carer. She would go over and he was teaching extra lessons. I just thought he was a good friend of hers. That's all I thought it was." He claimed that their argument started through Lance, and then she just seemed to want me out the house, if you know what I mean. It was not very nice. He said, "I think I got arrested a couple of times. It was just over things what she'd said. There was no truth in it. It was a horrible time. I feel like I was losing my house. If I hadn't have got my son with me, I would have been out and she would have gotten the house." In fact, as a result of the police investigation, Kelvin learned that Yvonne had wanted him dead too, because of course he was unaware that she made this plan to initially kill him. Kelvin was only alive because Yvonne was still trying to recruit a contract killer to murder him in order to cash in on a life insurance policy. Yvonne being Thelma. Detective Chief Inspector Ken Raper, who led the inquiry, he said, Mr. Baker was an easy target. He was disabled and extremely weak. This was a premeditated killing. It was planned and executed callously. This was a terrible tragedy for the Baker family. The murderers are callous, evil people who conducted this murder with the sole purpose of benefiting financially. DCI Reaper went on to say, the investigation started on June the 16th when we received a report of an unexplained death. It wasn't immediately apparent that it was a murder, but there was enough suspicion aroused for us to conduct a forensic post-mortem under the guidance of Professor Helen Whitwell. This revealed Mr. Baker had died of asphyxiation caused by smothering. We didn't release the fact that the cause was smothering, but that came out at the trial because the defendants talked about it. It appeared that a pillow from Mr. Baker's bed was missing from the address, and we believed that must be the murder weapon. He went on to say, following the post-mortem, we commenced our inquiries. We looked at all the people Mr. Baker came into contact with, and one of those was Thelma Yvonne Purchase. It was early on in the inquiry, while trying to establish a motive, that we looked at who would benefit from Mr. Baker's will. There was no other apparent motive. This is when they linked the will to the motive. Further on, Thelma herself was unhappy with her sentence and filed an appeal against it in 2009. She argued that it was too long compared to that of Shane and Lance. Lord Justice Hughes ruled against the appeal, citing that the sentence was richly deserved. Lance himself said regarding his jail time, in here you got everything. You got a stereo, a TV, you got your food, 3 meals a day. I've got it nice. I don't want it to change. Living large apparently. When he was asked what he thought life was like outside of jail, he said, it's horrible. It's a nightmare. I wouldn't like to be out there at all. I prefer to stay inside for a while and wait until it calms down. When asked how he felt about his mother trying to absolve herself of responsibility, he said, when my mom was in court and she blamed me, I saw for myself how evil women can be. I jumped across the court thing and tried to smash her on the head. He further emphasized that other than this, he regarded the entire trial as dull. He added, I fell asleep 5 times. It wasn't really the best impression to make, but I couldn't help. When I got sentenced, I almost collapsed. But now I don't even think about it. Time flies by. Now, in a weird twist, in jail, Thelma reportedly found love with a transgender woman. She is said to have had a romance with fellow murderer Ty Pilley, who was known as Douglas Wakefield, before undergoing £11,000 gender reassignment surgery. The couple had met after Pilley was transferred to a women's jail in Flockton, Wakefield, following the operation. They then had a civil partnership ceremony at New Hall in 2010 after being granted permission. Purchase and Pilley reportedly paid £345 towards the cost of their nuptials from their prison bank accounts. Inmates who attended the service were provided with a buffet, which they washed down with non-alcoholic drinks. 2 wings of prisoners were locked in their cells so staff could cover the wedding. A prison service woman said, prisoners are entitled to apply to the governor to register a civil partnership in prison under the Civil Partnership Act, so long as certain criteria defined under the Act are met. But the relationship later hit the rocks after she reportedly became close to another inmate. Prison bosses then moved her to a jail in the south of England. You know what this is? This is just a story of a stupid woman, right? She had no purpose, no place. She exploited this man, and then she dropped her son right in it. Look at the way her son speaks. I prefer it in jail, and I hate it outside of jail. She failed him. She failed him. What he did was wrong, and it was a conscious choice. But I think he should only have been given half that sentence. I don't know. What do you guys think? But her, she should never be released. What a classless clown.
Giving cash each time that she visited. Ken Raper and his team did not have nearly enough evidence to arrest Thelma Yvonne Purchase, but her trips to Greg, together with the fact that she would benefit from his death, were enough to keep them interested in her. Detectives began investigating Purchase's movements on the evening of the murder.
The police